Well, good evening, everybody. It is I, Nick Pennsylvania. I'm here, as I always am, with my good friend Brendan Bond. Good evening, Brendan.
Good evening.
And here again with somebody who was on once before some time ago when we went to the mass grave. You remember going to the Black Cross? My daughter Claire, I sent her on a wild goose chase earlier today, mislabeling something, and it bore some delicious gooseberries just the same. So we're gonna roll with this. Yeah, I slipped up because we're on a little bit of a victory lap right now. And this is when things get very serious. This is not just some run of the mill participation award miscongeniality thing. We've received a major award. I believe a leg lamp is in my future. Brendan, do you want to get people wise?
Yeah, so what ended up happening was we've mentioned it a few times in the last few episodes, I guess, but we ended up winning actually the favorite episode for the Helly Awards, which are from the podcast Hemlocks to Hellbenders, which we were on a few weeks ago. And it's just like really cool, especially considering who all Christian had as guests this year for this season. There was the big names, like people pretty high up in like PA, DCNR, and other big organizations, and I mean, and a lot of just like fantastic episodes. Like I told Christian whenever he first said we were nominated, that my favorite episode was the Fireflies one, and that one actually won favorite episode featuring an individual. But just as a little bit of a plug for everyone else out there, the other episodes that won, the favorite episode featuring a government employee was the Black Shannon State Park, charting a course through wilderness and wetlands, which we've
I
been.
definitely voted for that one.
Yeah, I mean, Black Shannon is a super cool park to begin with, and that was a really fun episode. And then the one that won best episode featuring an organization was discovering the wonderful world of mushrooms with the Philadelphia Mycology Club, which
That
is
was
another.
one of the first episodes I listened to,
It was
honestly.
really good. Yeah. So like the fact that our names are kind of up there with that group, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool. Like that's pretty cool. Like so
We're as
everyone who
big as
voted,
mushrooms.
right. So I mean like everybody who voted, thank you. And if you haven't listened to our episode of Hemlocks to Hellbenders, go listen to it.
I would say it was the best of the year as the public has as the
The data
has
backs that up. At least from a voting standpoint. But really, I mean, all the episodes over there are fantastic. One of our favorite shows out there, and good friends of ours.
Yeah, I know Christian just gave a preview to next year's season.
Yeah,
So yeah, definitely check him out. Really enjoyable, and because he talks to a variety of people, everything's very Pennsylvania centric. But really interesting, even if you're not in Pennsylvania, but you're thinking
yeah.
there's just so much interesting stuff. It's a big state, and there's something for everybody.
Right. I think that's why shows like his do so well is because I think he does a really good job of taking some of what in some cases are kind of these what may seem like micro topics, and through, the questions and everything, and through talking to these folks, you see how it relates to so many other larger issues. And I think that's again why the crossover between stuff like his show and like paranormal fans is so easy, is because you look into one little thing and suddenly it blossoms into all these other things, and it's just really enjoyable. So
It's really enjoyable, and it's extremely humbling. It's extremely kind. It's very extreme to be nominated and to have won that. I'm over the moon.
yeah,
Yes.
really
Well,
excited. And so we'll have a link to that in the show notes today for sure.
absolutely. So, what we're getting back to today is just kind of some of the stuff. Every time we do anything about a haunted place or something, we talk about, oh, we don't do a lot of these anymore, and we want to get back. And that's happened more often than not. So, funny enough, you were looking up, and you're going to take us on a history tour of a haunted place in Philadelphia, and you told me, hey, I want you to look up a place. It was featured on the first season of Unsolved Mysteries. It's right outside of Philadelphia proper. And I I must have misheard, and I told Claire here, hey, look up this other inn in the same area with a kind of similar name. And again, it yielded good fruit, but we're gonna get into that. But yes,
Uh,
I've goofed, but it's all good because good stories were found. So what have you been looking up here, Brendan?
Yeah, so what I was looking up, and again, just to like I it's very possible that I gave you incorrect information, but I think that it is just really funny that we still found something haunted, you know? So there was no like red flags on either end.
Well,
And that
and I
just
will say too, when before we started recording,
yeah,
you had said, "Oh, I had reached out to that place directly a while ago to see if they had any stories," and Claire had found out that the place she looked up
up.
no longer did at all. What is it now?
It's been a synagogue since 2005.
Right.
Yeah. So I was worried whenever you said that, I was worried that I had been emailing a synagogue asking if they were haunted previously, which not the best look, you know.
No, no.
So
But thankfully that wasn't it. I just goofed. So anyway, I'll be quiet. I'm really excited to learn some more about because the place you looked into wasn't one I was particularly familiar with.
yeah, so this was something that came up. I mean, like we have some topics for this show that sit on our lists for months or years. Other times something will kind of like show up in just random places, and then I'm like, well, this is something I have to look into now. And so for some reason, I had never heard of the City Tavern in Philadelphia before, and especially being referenced to it being haunted. And then I heard about it three different times in the course of like a day or two. And I was like, well, I guess I need to look into this now. Very quickly, you realize this place has a pretty wild history that I think it's just really kind of like interesting overall, not only for the ghost stories, but just the history of the building in general. Because this location, City Tavern Restaurant, um, is right on South Second Street in Philadelphia. This is right at the hub where the Continental Congress happened, and City Hall is right nearby,
Not
and
too far from the Philly Spectrum.
right, yeah. And like there's all kinds of stuff there. The Penn's Landing is like 3 blocks away. When you're
Everywhere
thinking
you
of
look,
like
there's history.
when you're thinking of like the historic area of Philadelphia, I'm not sure. I'm sure there is like an outlined historic district here. It's that's where we're thinking of. It's right next to 95 there, right along the war, right along the wharf there and everything. That's where we're talking about. And so the City Tavern was built in 1773. So this is an old place, a lot of history. For you history buffs out there, that's pre-Revolutionary War, So this is old. And like I said, this was at 138 South Second Street in Philly. So the reason this tavern was even back then so important was because the first and second Continental Congresses took place very close, and a lot of the kind of like movers and shakers that we think of from a historic standpoint, um, this was one of the taverns that they would go to, whether taking breaks for lunch or afterwards. Some folks stayed there. Basically, if you were coming through town and you wanted to kind of rub elbows with, James Madison or something like that, this is where you went. So, just a kind of cool place for all of these guys. John Adams is quoted as saying that the City Tavern is the most genteel tavern in America. That's a direct quote from John Adams. So highly regarded. In
So,
1774, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, no, real quick. So was this? There were certain places, mostly tea and coffee shops, that
Hmm.
became known, of course, as like penny universities and whatnot. Is City Tavern an example of that, or is this just literally a
It seems so. From what I can, that's an excellent question. I didn't find anything that pointed to this place being the location where like certain ideas were like formed or penned or anything.
okay?
Um, I think this was kind of more like the after hours kind of club, where everyone went to kind of like unwind almost. But again, this is like where everyone was at, so you would kind of think that that would be kind of some of the stuff that was happening there. Obviously, they talked about work. One of the other fun facts was whenever Paul Revere was coming through to announce the closure at the port of Boston and everything in 1774. This was apparently like the first place he really stopped in Philadelphia to talk to folks. So there was a lot just kind of like this is where everyone kind of
Right. Being in the
went
heart of
to.
Philadelphia,
Right.
right
Yeah.
before the revolution kicks off, kind of in the fomenting years. So
Right. So the location is rife for all that stuff.
choice location.
Right.
And so
So
has it operated as an inn tavern for all this time, or has it been other things?
so what happened was in 1774, it should be not in 1774, but after 1776 and into 1777, it was actually used to house prisoners of war on both sides at different times.
For some reason in our conversation, Brendan said it's prisoners of war, and that caused a flood of balloons to appear. I don't know
Oh my God.
settings of the program we're using
Oh,
that says prisoners of war makes balloons appear, but
that's
happy birthday.
really unfortunate graphics. Um, what a weird night we're having. I love this. This makes me so happy. So this was used for other things for a period of time during the war. Right afterwards, it kind of went back to being a tavern and an inn. It was, like I said, it was a big hotspot during the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and then it operated as an inn and a tavern up until 1834. So in 1834, there was a fire. And the fire is actually part of the impetus for one of the two kind of main ghost stories of the tavern. Um, but before we kind of get into that ghost story, I want to give you kind of what happened to the building since then, because I think this is actually particularly interesting for those of you who are into kind of the historical side of this. So the fire that ended up happening was really detrimental to the building, and it ended up just being straight up torn down in 1854. Now, what ended up then happening is in 1946, that whole area became part of a National Park Service historical park, like the historical part of town there and everything. So it was acquired by the National Park Service in 1946, and they actually rebuilt it in 1976. So the building that stands there now, whenever you look at the City Tavern, is not the one from, 1773. It is rebuilt, but it was rebuilt using period appropriate like tools, and it used all this like data that they had from like insurance records and from personal diaries and from like just from different sources.
It sounds
Um,
like this was a big project, really, with a lot to do with, of course, the 200-year anniversary.
oh, for sure, yeah. And that was the idea, is they kind of think they wanted to get it back up and running by 1976 for the bicentennial.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, as a project manager, I can imagine the person at the National Park Service who was in charge of getting that ready for 1976. Probably a big deal. That was probably a pretty wild project. But so after that, once it was rebuilt, it was then just used uh, as a restaurant that also hosted like parties and everything. I don't think there was any actual in operation part of it after that. But when you go there, it was like all very period appropriate, like wait staff and everything, and the food and the menus and everything. So it was kind of like supposed to be like going back in history and eating and everything. Unfortunately, and there was a famous chef that worked there for a long time. And it was a pretty big deal, but unfortunately, it closed in 2020 due to COVID restrictions and is yet to actually reopen. So it looks like there are plans for it to reopen, but it just seems like everywhere I was looking, it seems like it keeps kind of just getting pushed and pushed. So not entirely sure what the issue is there. But so even without all the paranormal stuff that we're going to get into, pretty interesting like lineage of this spot and building, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
would agree. I did not realize, you had sent a couple photos that we were looking at.
Yeah.
I did not realize that it was rebuilt, nor did I realize what attention to detail it was rebuilt with. Now, not to get too ahead, because I know you're going to start diving into that business right now, but because of its history, am I safe in assuming that the abundant amount of spirits and ghost stories surrounding the building itself have to deal with the revolution?
You would be correct.
Okay.
It would be disappointing if they were ghosts of you know, things that were there in between or something, or just random.
Disappointing maybe from a historicity or
Right.
retelling
Yeah.
aspect, but I mean, again, this is what we always talk about is like there's going to be a person that was famous and they were there for 20 minutes, but if a famous person was there for 20 minutes, anytime there's a ghost in that place, it's going to always be the famous person.
Right. Right. Now, what I will give the good people of Philadelphia credit for is I didn't find any ghost stories of someone being like, "Oh, I saw James Madison in the corner booth or something like that." Or I saw Ben Franklin, whistling at waitresses over in the corner or something.
Dissecting bodies in the basement.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so it kind of fits that kind of profile. This is a pretty like high visibility place and everything. Now, the two kind of main ghost stories that come out of this location, one is tied to that fire. So, and like this event, like certainly happened by all accounts. So in 1834, there was this fire, and what we had is upstairs you had a wedding getting ready to happen, and you had in one of the rooms you had the groomsmen, and in one of the rooms you had the bride and the bridesmaids, kind of all getting ready, and kind of all the versions of the story, either a candle or possibly an oil lamp tips over in the bridal suite with all the bridesmaids in it, catches things on fire. The wedding train goes up, and at least the bride burns to death. And it looks like in some accounts it says all of the bridesmaids. In some of the accounts that I found, it says two more. I mean, either way, at least three people lost their lives. The apparently it went up, everything kind of went up so quick that the groomsmen in the other room weren't able to do anything, and no one could really like it. I mean, because it burned the entire top half of the building off relatively quickly. So really tragic event. Like those deaths seem to have certainly happened. That's not part of that doesn't seem to be, in
Not in
question.
question, yeah.
Right. So so as a result, we have one of the main kind of ghosts coming out of these stories. So you have this woman in white that shows up in a wedding gown and with the wedding train and everything. Some people see her upstairs, some people see her in the window, which is one of the photos that I sent over to you two earlier. If you and again, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's just off of a Reddit link. Not a terribly convincing photo in my opinion.
No, and I'm pulling it back up again so that we can take another butcher's at it. No, I now you say so there are five windows up at the top floor of the building,
Hmm.
and the people are saying if you look at the one where there are no curtains, or maybe a half curtain, you can see kind of in one of the lower panes like a roundish shape.
Right.
And that's about all one can say. What would you describe it as?
A dirty window.
Yeah, maybe some flash, some light. Maybe there's something inside the room reflecting, but yeah, as you say, not particularly convincing evidence.
Yeah, it's a nice little photo of the building. I don't think it shows anything paranormal, in my opinion. But people say they see her up there in the window whenever they're passing by. Now, one of the coolest stories that I couldn't find any photos of, which is really frustrating because it came up everywhere when I was looking up this story, is people say that she shows up in wedding photos of people who are there celebrating their weddings and like wedding receptions at this place because it does like events now and everything too, or at least again up until 2020. And like the idea of people showing up in photos that aren't supposed to be there is really cool. And there is some like really wild evidence out there in the paranormal community of the dead showing up in photos, but I couldn't find any. So if any of our Philadelphia friends have found those before, send them our way. I'd love to see them.
Yeah, ghost photography is something that we've talked about quite a bit. I think of it much like EVPs. There are very, very few examples where I don't think there's a good explanation. But even when they're very clearly explainable, they're very frequently still kind of spooky looking. I know
Right,
there was that Canadian spirit photographer who years ago for my
right.
birthday, you and I had fun and took photos,
Yeah,
and we're recreating that, like things with like cheesecloth and everything. And they are just not convincing at all, but they are still haunting images. They're
right.
very spooky.
Yeah, even like the Ghost Rider stuff, which we should do a whole episode on sometimes. There was the Ghost Rider stuff in, I believe, like the 80s and 90s that, like, by all accounts, is probably fake, you know? But no one has been able to reproduce it to the extent that the person who says that, they're that they aren't fake, claims. So I love ghost photography in general, but I couldn't find any pictures of this lady, but that came up a bunch of different places as people said, like, oh yeah, like in my aunt's wedding, there's someone there in a white gown that you know, no one recognized or is in the background or something, which is just like cool. Most of the sightings of her seem to be kind of like her walking by. Um, and one of the things I expected to find but didn't, and then maybe they're out there, but you would think there would be people smelling like oil or people smelling burnt, anything just burning from like the fire or something. There doesn't seem to be any phantom smells associated with this, which is what you would think, you
Well,
know?
I'll say this. On the paranormal level, you would think you would pick up on those sort of things. On a building level, I'm not entirely surprised because we talk about smells and wood, get trapped in wood.
Right.
I remember one of the previous houses we lived in, we had to, and there's a cat interfering with us, and we're just gonna have to deal with
Oh,
that. Um, he's just interjecting. But anyhow, one of the first houses my wife and I bought just had been destroyed, and we had to go in with respirators on to clean the basement. It was nasty. It smelled terrible. We filled like three dumpsters.
right.
But we cleaned it up. We'd used kills. We'd repainted. We had recarpeted. We had been living there for like a year. And every once in a while, when it was raining outside, I would walk down those wooden basement steps and I would have the memory of that smell. Like it never fully left. And so when I hear people talk about like, oh, we're in this old house and we smell the cigar smoke, like the cherry tobacco and whatnot,
Right.
it's not totally remarkable. It's explainable to me when there's a lot of wood present. However, as you say,
This is a
this
completely
thing
new
was
building. Yeah.
built, right.
Right. Right. So, but yeah, so that's you're right. You would expect it, but that's a good reason why there's not, as far as like mundane explanations for sure. So yeah, that's kind of like one of the two kind of main stories that people talk about is this ghost bride, which again it is interesting for how many like woman in white stories that are out there that we talk about and everyone talks about. I would say, generally speaking, you don't always have a actual documented incident to where like this person is coming from. Usually it is just a vague carriage overturning on a vague turn somewhere or something.
Yeah. Or like the Cemetery Mary sort of.
Right, exactly. This seems to be a legitimate like traumatic event that killed some people. So that at least sets it apart in some ways, I think. So now the other kind of main story, which this one is like super creepy from a visual standpoint too,
Oh, yes.
is yeah. So this one is there was a waiter, and this is back in the 1780s. There was a waiter who got into a altercation with a officer and who was a colonel, and they ended up dueling, and the officer killed this waiter over whatever. But he got off. He was never actually charged with the murder. I couldn't find any documentation over whether it was like why or
Right.
like what the circumstances were, because like I don't know enough about how duels worked in the 1780s.
Well, and
Like,
it may have been legal.
yeah, it might have been.
I
Yeah.
think it was
So
legal for a long while. I know
right,
it became illegal like in piecemeal. Here
right.
and here. Because again, Burr and Hamilton,
Right.
I
Well,
believe
yeah.
that was a legal duel.
Right,
I believe they
right.
agreed to it.
So yeah, I don't know enough about the legality of it to know if, but that was cited a few places that he was never charged, and these places made it sound like he should have been charged. So not sure that how all that played
I'm
out. I
gonna
couldn't
look
find
into
it.
that.
Yeah, see if you can find anything. I couldn't find anything that was definitive one way or the other. Um, Either way, it does seem like there's enough accounts that this waiter did die. Now the interesting thing is his apparition shows up, and his apparition shows up in two distinct ways. And this is again kind of like with the unfortunate bride, kind of interesting as far as like the visuals. It's not that he shows up walking by. It's not that any of this. He shows up either a falling to the ground, like people will just see a ghost just fall to the ground, which is like a creepy visualization, like just someone's just there and they drop, but then there's no one there. So people are seeing him actually like falling, which I think is just a cool, like I said, visualization.
I'll
The
pause
other
there for a
one,
moment, just
yeah,
because some breaking news. When did that duel supposedly occur?
in the 17 between the 1780s and 1790s.
Okay, because dueling was only made illegal in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1794.
So
So it had
that would
made it
match, yeah.
highly legal.
Yeah, so it very well could have been a completely legal duel. Well, that's a great point. So the story at least makes it sound like this is like a vengeful spirit, you know. So you either see the apparition just appearing and dropping, or the apparition will show up and you won't see him moving at all, but you will see the blood bloom on his chest and then he disappears. Again, which is interesting now because I think people, it seems like a lot of people, when they do see this apparition, think that he's someone who still works there because, again, when people are at this place, the wait staff is walking around in period appropriate garb.
Right. The
So
age of it's the selling point.
yeah, so I think that's kind of interesting. You also have this entity being the one who is blamed for a lot of the kind of mischievous activity in the tavern. Like I said, there was a famous chef, a gentleman by the name of Walter Stabe, who's an Emmy Award winning chef, who on multiple occasions has talked about how this apparition will, you know, move around silverware and things will clatter and move around table settings and all the typical haunted restaurant stuff. So those are kind of the two big stories that come out of the City Tavern in Philadelphia. What are some of your other thoughts on it?
Well, I don't have any initial thoughts other than that's just really cool that they rebuilt the structure.
Right. Yeah.
I
I think that's really
what
cool.
any thoughts on your end, Claire?
There's just a lot of parallels between this and the surprising other.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
even better.
So
Uh,
I'll segue us then
yeah.
because you
Okay.
reached out to me right before Christmas and you said look into the General Warren Inn, INNE. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I did a bit of that. Of course, it was featured in the very first season of Unsolved Mysteries way back in 1987 times. I had seen that episode several times myself. I rewatched it this evening in preparation. But I've been busy and I reached out to Claire here because she's on break from school. And I said, Claire, I need to do some digging into the Anthony Wayne, or was it Wayne Inn?
General Wayne Inn.
Yeah, the General
General
Wayne
Wade.
Inn, which
Oh,
is
wow.
also in the same greater
Oh,
Philadelphia.
right.
The General Warren Inn was built in 1704, and the General Wayne Inn was built like in what, the 1740s?
No,
No,
1704.
1704.
Oh, wow. Okay.
General Warren Inn was 17.
Okay. So that's significantly older even than the City Tavern we're
bottom
talking
line is
about.
I
Yeah.
goofed, but General Inn and W name
Right.
and Philly area, you can kind of see how this happened.
Hmm.
But because there's a bit out about the General Warren, I'm going to hand things over to Claire to get us hip to the General Wayne Inn.
He says reached out. He means reached out 45 minutes.
Oh, it was before we even talking about it.
So the General Wayne Inn was opened in 1704. It's been a synagogue since 2005. It's been known by many names, the William Penn Inn, probably because the land was bought from William Penn by the original builder, and he stayed there multiple times. It was a tavern slash restaurant slash inn for a long time. And it was also used as the polling place, which gets tied in later. It was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. It has been on a lot of different ghost TV shows, but its current name is after General Mad Anthony Wayne, though he only stayed there once.
Mad Anthony Wayne.
Right.
Yeah, General.
Never heard of.
Well,
Never.
I am well aware of Matt Anthony Wayne.
Oh,
He died up at Presque Isle, and he was
really?
there for a while. He was a Revolutionary War, figure, pretty well known. He's from the Philly area originally. He had worked for Ben Franklin, sent him up to Nova Scotia.
Oh,
His father.
okay. I have heard of this guy. Okay.
He was
Okay.
returning from a military post up in Detroit. Was on Presque Isle that he died. There are some conspiracies that he was poisoned by a political rival of sorts. It's interesting. His son eventually digs up his body from Presque Isle and boils it so that he can just put all the bones in a couple sacks and then rides them back along the corridor, which is now 322, which of course had been a trail, a
Uh-huh.
highway. And there are rumors and stories abound in the folklore of the region that say little bits of Mad Anthony Wayne fell out of the bags on the ride back east along what is now today Route 322. So yeah, that's just Anthony
And
Wayne.
yeah, and it's funny how his son took care of him. That's the same way I believe your last wishes are written up too, Nick, right? To be
I want
boiled,
my body to be boiled,
put it in
disinterred, boiled,
multiple sacks, burlap
multiple
sacks,
stacks.
and
Yes.
then sprinkled along 322.
Right.
Yeah.
Route 322 specifically, or
As yeah,
not that choosy.
yeah, right.
But no,
But
it's interesting. He has descendants, direct descendants that are still known, including a semi-famous rapper who has a pretty good career.
oh
Ooh.
really?
Not Little Wayne,
That'd be funny though.
Little Mad Wayne.
Ooh.
I forget it. I want to say it's John Wayne, but I might be mistaken. But you can
But
look.
wasn't he tied up with oh, what's the Pittsburgh folk hero that was made up? Macarac.
Oh
Macarac.
yeah, Macarac.
Macarac.
Joe
I,
Macarac.
yeah. I think he was tied into some of those stories. Same with maybe with the Daniel Boone stuff. Whenever he was on a
Not sure
whenever he
about. I
was
don't
whenever
think
he
he's
was on a
tied to Joe
riverboat.
Macarac in any way,
I
although he certainly would have appeared in some books
yeah, I think that's
that
what it
were
was. Not so much he
Pennsylvania
was
folklore.
actually doing stuff here in Pittsburgh, but like shows up in the same like little like dime novels and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I didn't realize that's who it was, but okay. So there is a Mad. So the place was named after Mad Anthony Wayne.
Ultimately, right.
Ultimately, it sounds like that's so interesting. Okay.
Um, in kind of parallel to what happened with your building where it built down. Nope.
It
Burned
built
down.
down.
Burned down and was rebuilt. This tavern has just kind of been built around. So all
Oh,
the
okay.
structures there just covered in others.
New facades, as they say.
Right.
Okay, interesting.
From what I can tell, the most recent kind of haunting situation that has been happening there is James Edwin Webb and his business partner Celio bought it in 1995 and continued running it as like an inn, tavern, restaurant situation. But James was found murdered there in 96.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
then the next year, Celio's girlfriend was found after she had committed suicide in the building. And it's speculated that she committed suicide because she was hung by the guilt that she knew who killed James,
Oh,
and it was
wow.
the
Yeah.
business partner, and he was found guilty in 2001.
Some speculate that
Oh.
he was an accomplice,
Right,
right?
right.
Or like, oh, that's wild. So that's like some legit drama. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But also similarly to your haunt, um, the inn had many famous
People.
visitors, like
Hmm.
um like Lafayette, Julius Irving, Ben Franklin, William Penn, George Washington, Anthony Wayne, and my favorite, Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh,
Um,
really? Oh,
but
wow.
also similarly to yours, there's not a lot of stories about the famous people haunting.
Right.
However, I did find one about Edgar Allan Poe sitting in his favorite chair, but it was
Oh,
one among many.
I
right.
just thought it
Okay.
really cool that there's these famous people that they're citing, and it's going, these figures from the 18th and 19th century, and then you get Dr. J in there, which is
Well, especially in Philadelphia, that's.
yeah, and Dr. J is still alive, so there's no reports of his
You're
what?
right.
No, there's no reports of him haunting the place.
Well, I mean, that does happen. That does happen. It's just that brings in the whole thing into question, doesn't it?
Being alive.
Why would Dr. J
Their weekend at
faking
burning him.
Oh,
Dr.
that'd be.
J?
Anyway,
Yeah, so that is cool that it has the same kind of like provenance of all these famous people. But again, I think that's actually probably a good sign that the majority of the ghost stories are just like these famous people because like we've said, that's the low hanging fruit, you know.
right.
20 years from now, there's going to be, because it's a synagogue now, and Julius is going to be gone,
Stop.
and there's going to, what are you doing?
You're
There's going to
making
be
fun of
stories
me.
of like, yeah, this haunted synagogue, Dr. J's doing layups
You're
out in the
making fun of
parking
me.
lot.
Just dunking on folks. Jeez.
You have no idea who Dr. J is, do you?
No, I didn't.
That's fine. He's a
Okay.
famous basketball
I
player.
know now.
The context clues gave it away.
Anyway, that's cool that he stayed there still.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Cool.
for sure. Julius Irving is, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Anyway, another one of the more recent haunts is I was on a Philadelphia Haunts website, and it's just people sharing their stories. So I was
That's
on
cool.
this General Wayne page,
Hmm.
and there was a woman who shared her story of she was at like a baby shower or something in a private room, and she got a whiff of like a strong cigar scent,
Okay.
and she left the room, didn't smell it anymore, went back in, asked another woman that was there if she had smelled it, and she agreed. And then she noticed that the painting that was across from the chair she was sitting in was of a man smoking a cigar.
Oh, okay.
Which again, that was very recent in 2022. But again, that kind of ties back to you kind of remember how things smell. You have those memories. You have
Right. Oh,
expectations
yeah.
of how things are going to smell.
So one of the things that happened to me recently was I came home and I was out doing like Christmas shopping or something. And we used to always go out to Chambersburg for Christmas, where two of my grandparents were at. And my grandmother, who's no longer with us, used to always make pot pie, which for those who are from that area know that it's basically like chicken noodle soup, kind of. It's not an actual pie. Which is a whole other debate, but it has a very particular smell to it that I remember smelling like every kind of Christmas. And I came home, I hadn't really been thinking about that at all necessarily, but I walked back into the house and I swear on everything that's holy that I could smell that soup being made to the point where I was like, who in the heck left the stove on with no one else like home? It took me a good 5-10 minutes to like really kind of get my bearings because I was so sure that there was like an open pot of chicken noodle soup somewhere. Now, do I think that was necessarily paranormal? No, but it's a good example of like when your brain and your olfactory senses like decide what something is, it's very hard to convince yourself otherwise. So if you're in a situation where you're at a baby shower like this woman was, and if your brain decides like, oh, I smell cigar smoke, it's very hard to convince yourself that you're not smelling cigar smoke. So
Right.
whether it's paranormal or not, that's something at least I can relate to. So
I'm gonna do like rapid fire of all these ghosts that have been found or sightings,
let's
and
do
then
it.
we can circle back. Um, so there's been reports of towels being thrown around in kitchens, issues with TVs, and obviously ghost sightings. There was an incident where a valet walked past a Cadillac and its horn started beeping and its wipers started going, and they talked with the owner and everything, and there was no explanation. Women get their necks blown on. A former like housemaster, while closing up, saw a ghostly decapitated head in a chest of drawers while closing up. Frightened soldier ghosts have been seen, and they've been like calling employees names. That one's interesting because a report of it was made, and then it was found that 100 years previous, the same report had been made. There's people that have gone for like a little Halloween night, and there's a Halloween broadcast on, and the TV turned clockwise for the whole
Duration of
duration,
that
and it had
segment.
never happened before, and it never happened again. During an election, while it was used as a poll house, a woman went to the basement to get ballots and saw a green uniformed soldier that had been previously seen in the wine cellar and everything, and suspected him to be a Hessian soldier. Many more left behind Hessian soldiers have been seen. There's been many Hessian soldiers seen, British officers, specifically one looking for a locket in the building. Obviously, the cigar scent. There were redcoats that stayed there. There's been redcoats seen. One of the deeper stories is there allegedly was a tunnel connecting the cellar to a nearby field during like a war.
As like an
And
escape route or something. Yeah.
right. And after a victory, a Hessian soldier was sent back to the cellar to get wine and everything, and he was ambushed and killed and buried under the tunnel. And he is seen in the cellar looking for wine, looking to celebrate.
Now, is there any? Were you able to find if that's actually true that there was this tunnel, or is that
It's still alleged.
apocryphal?
However, the entire cellar was dug out to find remains and everything, and there was evidence that there could have been more of a cellar or something attached to it.
They may have been filled in or something.
They found evidence that, yeah, maybe there was something else here.
No, like a different part of the cellar that was filled in or something.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Now, real quick, because I got confused earlier when I introduced this. This was the place that was featured on Unsolved Mysteries back in '87,
Mm.
and a lot of the people that had experienced, like the women having the back of their neck blown on, or
That's
the
so creepy.
incident that Claire spoke about, a couple of the people that were present to see that are interviewed in that episode of Unsolved Mysteries. And certainly, I think that helped to cement a lot
Right.
of theories around this location.
Then there's a few smaller sightings. Two kleptomaniac women seem to be nervous about that they stole something. A boy missing his mom. A woman in
Oh.
a period dress. It just said period dress. Didn't
But
say
not
Not
here.
which period.
Like
Yeah.
300 years.
right.
Yeah.
And then native women are seen there a lot too.
Now, when you said
Wow.
redcoats, I'm assuming you're talking about British soldiers and not just redcoats. Coats of
Just like velour coats from the 70s, which would be period. That would be a period coat, you know.
velvet
Yeah.
robes.
I think it's interesting they talk about the Hessian soldiers on a few times. It sounds like, which like I don't know, definitely has like a spookier vibe to it than just normal soldiers. I'm not sure if that would have been true back then, but it probably was.
I would say there's something spookier about it because you think about they talk about them being left behind.
Right.
Verbiage that's utilized so frequently. And again, I think that's directly coming from the word choice of some people in the Unsolved Mysteries episode. There was a psychic who came in, and that's how she described it. And so I think there is something more to that because the Hessians were predominantly Prussians
Right.
that were brought in as mercenaries. I'm always a little irritated when they say it was Germans because, again,
Germany
as we
didn't.
know,
Yeah.
Germany doesn't exist for like another 100 years
Right.
by this point. But the bottom line is they, a lot of even the British soldiers that were fighting were tied to the land here. A lot of the British,
Right.
sure, some of them were shipped over, but a
Yeah.
lot of them were already here.
Right.
Whereas with the Hessians, they are essentially hired guns, and
Right.
when they die, not only are they dead, but and left behind here maybe, but they are literally left. They are so
Right.
far removed, and I
Right.
think that loss and longing is another part of
That has to, yeah, that has to be different, like, again, not better or worse, but just it has to be different in some way, you'd think. I'm sure thousands of them that died over here like that.
I don't know how
Uh,
many came over. I
I think it
know
was like
that
tens of thousands, I think, over the
really.
course of the war. I think it was a lot. Yeah.
I'd be curious
Hold
again.
on.
The war, yeah, the war lasts. The American Revolution lasts a bit longer than I think most people recognize because the United States under the Constitution didn't exist, I don't think, until like 1783.
Yeah. So
Oh,
according
okay.
to AmericanBattlefieldTrust.org, 34,000 German soldiers.
Okay. That
Yeah.
is considerably more than I would have guessed. I would
But
have
it,
thought
mm,
like 4 to 5,000.
yeah, but again, like you said, they do reference them as German soldiers, which, as we've just said, isn't exactly accurate. So, yeah, we'll assume there was a few thousand at least, without doing any real serious digging. No pun intended. But yeah, no, but I do think that is kind of like spooky for sure. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the stories, it sounds like, Claire, are ghosts that are like in some state of like distress.
Right.
It's not like fun, playful ghosts. It's like a problem is occurring,
Right.
which is definitely a very different vibe. When it comes to what was the one on here that I thought was interesting? The head showing up in the drawer. That's like very specific. Did it have anything more about like does that show up more than once, or is it just like a one-off kind of thing?
As I
Or
recall, it was just a one-off the
Yeah.
time I heard.
wow,
And it was kind of like a kind of could have been the trick of a light situation because it was a second.
Yeah,
right,
it was a server or something. He was coming through if that I he was an employee there and
right,
he
okay,
walked by and he said I walked right past it and then he goes into the next room and he describes like I hit a wall.
right,
I'm like I just saw a head and it
right,
didn't say like there was nothing like the bloom of blood that you
or
described.
yeah, with the other guy.
It's nothing like this was a decapitated head. It was just
Just a head.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and again, like going back to the some of these other stories on here, I think that like the idea of a frightened ghost is somehow like almost like more unsettling because it's like, well, no, like you're the one who's supposed to be scaring me.
Well,
There's
it's
a
also
weird,
that, there is some comfort. I think a lot of people are very insistent on their belief because there is a desire for something to continue beyond this mortal coil.
coil, right?
And if it's like, hey, I'm going to linger in this place that I was very close to, and I get to keep a routine of some kind and watch over things,
Right.
I think
That
that's a
feels
comfort to
right.
people.
There's a comfort to that for sure. Yeah.
I think if you realize like I may be trapped in a place I don't want to be, and I might be stuck in a moment of despair, I don't think there's any comfort there at all.
Right. Right, especially if it's a like as we often say an intelligent haunting versus a residual haunting.
Right.
But I think from a residual standpoint, that actually kind of lends credence to that because if the idea of a traumatic incident kind of replaying over and over again, that doesn't necessarily have any sentience that's interacting with the modern people who are witnessing it. Not saying that's any more or less believable, but that at least fits with the paradigm, if that's
Well,
the
and I think
case.
after a couple hundred or more years, you would get over.
Yeah, right.
You
Yeah.
would you would adjust to the situation.
Everybody moves on. Yeah,
Right.
that's
I mean,
true.
right. Time softens a lot of the edges.
Right, right. But it's interesting too that like there's so much different activity there. I think to some folks might be a bit of a red flag because it's like, well, how can this place have all this different activity? But like you said, it's been serving in some capacity as a gathering place for people for, over 300 years.
Yeah.
So
And now it is a pure synagogue and community center. And
right. Which again, a lot of it's good stuff, but you just have so much history there. And we don't have a ton of other examples of that. We don't have a lot of places that are over 300 years old that are continually occupied and for some sort of public use.
that's a good point. I mean, it's hard to find buildings this far west that are that old. We have a few.
Right.
But this is a place that is at the very dawn of the 18th century, and more to your point, has been a public place.
Not just like a house. Like we do
Right.
it like
This whole time.
Right.
It is a place that has opened its doors to people willing to walk in.
Right. So it's absolutely unique in that sense. So and I say that to say that the idea of there being everything from towels being thrown around to headless ghosts to not Carrie style. What was the Stephen King book with the car?
Yeah, that wasn't oh my goodness.
It's gonna kill me.
Christine.
I had the C right. Christine.
Cujo's dog.
Yeah, there's a lot of
They hide
C's.
in a car.
Right.
That's right. I haven't watched Cujo.
So it has like a myriad of experiences that people are having there, but it kind of checks out. Like if it was only one thing, that would almost be more surprising in some cases. Again, not better or worse, right or wrong, but just it that does kind of make sense. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really cool story, a really cool location. Is it? You said it's still being used as like a public synagogue and
Yes.
everything? Okay, so
yeah, it's both of these places, and probably the General Warren Inn as well.
Yeah,
no, because I failed to look that up properly. I mean, all of these are really good examples of a convergence of history and haunting. And again, as I maintain, I think people that are really interested in ghosts and stuff generally are people who have an appreciation or an understanding of some history. And this is perfect.
Right. And that's why I think this stuff is so interesting, because it's a good excuse to, for us selfishly, just looking these things up. It's fun to be like, okay, well, what happened at this location throughout all these different times? How does that fit with other, important events? And it's just a good excuse to talk about those things and do a little bit of, extra research. But yeah, so if you out there have a super old building or something you'd like us to look into, we love doing that. So please feel free to reach out and let us know.
And if you have an incredibly unconvincing photo of an old haunted building,
there we go.
Tell that.
We want to see it.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you so much, Claire. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.